There are people who notice a pattern in themselves, not all at once, but slowly. The way you notice a leak only after the floor is already wet. Someone comes close. Someone shows genuine interest. Someone starts to see them, really see them, and something inside shifts. Not toward connection, away from it. Not because they don't want to be known, but because something older and quieter than wanting takes over. Something that says, not yet, not like this, not too much, and the person retreats. Not dramatically. There's no argument, no cold shoulder, no clear moment of rejection, just a gradual cooling, a slower reply, a cancelled plan that never gets rescheduled, a door that was cracking open, quietly pulled shut. And afterward, sometimes days later, sometimes years, they wonder what happened, why they do this, why the people they actually wanted to keep are always the ones who end up leaving. This isn't about being antisocial. It isn't about not caring. It's about something far more complicated and far more human than most people will ever take the time to understand. If you recognize this pattern in yourself, I want you to know something before we go any further. This isn't a character flaw. It isn't proof that you're broken, emotionally unavailable, or destined to be alone. It's a response, a learned, intelligent, deeply personal response to experiences that taught you, at some point, in some way, that getting close to people carries a cost, and your nervous system, which is always trying to protect you, took that lesson seriously. The problem isn't that you push people away. The problem is that the same mechanism that protected you then is still running now. Even when the person standing in front of you isn't dangerous. Even when they're exactly what you've been quietly hoping for. You're not sabotaging your life. You're running an old program in a new situation. And the first step to changing it isn't to force yourself to stop. It's to understand why it started. There's an important distinction that most conversations about this miss entirely. The pattern isn't born from indifference. It's born from caring too much and learning through enough repetition that caring too much is where the pain lives. So you learn to care from a distance, to be warm but not close, present but not fully available, interested but always holding something back. And for a long time, that felt like wisdom, and it might still feel like wisdom. But there's a question worth sitting with. At what point does self-protection become self-deprivation? Here's what the psychology actually shows. And this is the part almost no one explains clearly. When people who are sensitive, introverted, or have a rich inner world experience connection, they don't just feel warmth, they feel exposure. Because to be known is to be seen, and to be seen is to be vulnerable to being misunderstood, judged, needed in ways you can't fulfill, changed into someone you don't recognize. For people who process the world deeply, who notice everything, feel everything longer, and carry emotional experiences with unusual intensity. Vulnerability isn't just uncomfortable, it's destabilizing. So the psyche develops a solution, not a healthy one necessarily, but a logical one. Keep people at a distance where they can't hurt you. Let them close enough to feel connection, but not so close that they can see the parts of you that might be rejected. Not so close that their leaving would cost you something real. It's a paradox that lives quietly inside people who want deep connection but have learned, through disappointment, through being misunderstood, through loving people who couldn't love them back in the right way. That depth is dangerous. And here is where it becomes particularly painful for someone like you, because you feel things more intensely than most. A single experience of being truly seen and then rejected doesn't leave a small mark. It leaves a blueprint, a reorganization of how you understand what closeness means and what it costs. And one conversation where you said something real and watched the other person's eyes go blank. One relationship where you gave everything and received management in return. One friendship where you thought you'd finally been understood, and then discovered you were only tolerated. Those experiences don't just hurt, they teach. And what they teach, quietly and thoroughly, is that the depth inside you is not safe to share. Schopenhauer described this tension with unusual precision. He called it the porcupine dilemma. A group of porcupines, he wrote, huddle together for warmth in the cold, but the closer they get, the more they wound each other with their quills, so they pull apart. But then the cold returns. So they move closer again, finding over time the exact distance at which they can be warm without drawing blood. He meant it as a metaphor for all human relationships. We need each other, but we also hurt each other simply by being what we are. Complex, needy, imperfect, capable of disappointment, and for people who feel more sharply than others, who are wounded more deeply by the quills of misunderstanding and emotional carelessness, the distance they choose is greater. The middle ground where warmth is possible without pain is harder to find. You're not cold, you're calibrated. The problem is that your calibration may have been set in a season of your life that no longer describes where you are now. If this is the kind of conversation you've been searching for, the one that goes beneath the surface and stays there, this channel exists for exactly that. A quiet place where these questions are taken seriously and where you never have to explain why you need to think before you speak. You're welcome here. I remember sitting across from someone I genuinely liked. Not romantically, just a person who had the kind of mind I rarely encountered. Someone who asked real questions, who listened in a way that made you feel the listening. We were at a small table in a coffee shop, mid-afternoon, the kind of hour when the place is almost empty and time moves differently. And I felt it, the warmth of being almost known, the pleasure of a conversation that had actual weight, and then, underneath it, something else, a quiet tightening in my chest, a subtle alarm that had no name but was unmistakably familiar. This is too good. This will cost you something. I didn't leave. I didn't say anything strange, but I felt myself pulling back, not physically but internally, becoming slightly more careful with my words, slightly less honest, slightly more managed. And by the time we said goodbye, I'd made sure the conversation ended before it could go anywhere real. I told myself I was tired, that I needed space, that I'd reach out soon. I never did. And I've thought about that afternoon many times since. Not with regret exactly, but with a kind of quiet recognition that took years to fully form. I had been given an open door, and I had chosen, without fully choosing, to walk past it. Because somewhere inside me, being truly known still felt more frightening than being alone. That wasn't a lack of desire for connection. It was a fear of what connection actually requires. Not just openness, but the willingness to be changed by someone else's presence. To let them matter. To become, in some small way, someone who could be left. And I wasn't ready for that. Not then. Here's what most people misunderstand about people like you. They assume that because you're comfortable alone, you don't need closeness. That because you push people away, you don't actually want them near. But that's not it at all. You want connection more than most people realize, including sometimes yourself. What you don't want is the version of connection that requires you to perform, to pretend, to shrink yourself into something more manageable, to be endlessly available in ways that drain you until there's nothing left. What you're protecting isn't your preference for solitude. You're protecting something more fragile than that. You're protecting the self you've worked so hard to understand, the inner world you've built carefully, and over years, the one that makes sense, the one that feels real, the one that doesn't require explanation or justification. You're afraid that real intimacy will disrupt it, that someone who gets too close will start asking you to change, to be different, to need less or feel less or be easier to love. And you've been down that road before. You know what it costs. You know what it feels like to let someone into your inner world, to open a door you rarely open, and watch them walk through it carelessly. To share something true about yourself and have it minimized, misread, or simply ignored. To be close to someone and still feel completely alone. That specific loneliness. The loneliness of being misunderstood by someone who is supposed to know you is worse than the loneliness of solitude. Far worse. Because at least in solitude, you were with someone who understands you completely. So you made a calculation, quiet and unconscious, but real. And the calculation said, the risk isn't worth it. But here's where we need to go one layer deeper, because this is where something important appears. The pattern of pushing people away rarely starts in adulthood. It starts much earlier. It starts in the moments, often small, often repeated, when you showed someone your real self and it wasn't received well. Maybe you were too sensitive and were told to toughen up. Maybe you needed more time alone and were called antisocial. Maybe you loved deeply and quietly, and the person you loved needed more noise, more proof, more performance than you knew how to give. Maybe you were simply too much for people who couldn't hold too much. And the child, the teenager, or the young adult who experienced those moments learned something, not consciously, not as a decision, but as a deep, somatic knowing. When I let people in, I lose something. And here is what makes this pattern so persistent. It wasn't wrong. In those early moments, in those specific relationships, the protection was necessary. The withdrawal was intelligent. The distance was the only tool available. The tragedy isn't that you learn to protect yourself. The tragedy is that the lesson never got updated. You kept the armor long after the battle was over. You kept scanning for threats in people who weren't threatening. You kept measuring new relationships against old wounds. Seneca understood this kind of self-protective withdrawal. He wrote, "Retire into yourself as much as you can. Associate with those who are likely to make you better. Welcome those who you yourself can improve." He wasn't prescribing isolation. He was describing discernment, the wisdom of protecting your inner world from people who would diminish it, while remaining open to those rare people who would expand it. The Stoics saw the inner life as the one territory that no one could invade without your permission. And they believed that guarding it wasn't selfishness. It was the foundation of everything else. But Seneca also knew the danger of taking this too far. He wrote about the difference between chosen solitude, which clarifies and restores, and fearful withdrawal, which slowly hollows you out. "There is nothing more dangerous," he said, "than to live as if you will never die." By which he meant, there is nothing more dangerous than living so carefully, so protected, so defended against loss, that you never fully live at all. You have been careful, wisely careful in many ways, but careful has a shadow side, and its name is absence. So let's make some important distinctions here, because this is where many people get lost. There is a difference between chosen solitude and fearful withdrawal. Chosen solitude is when you step back from the world to restore yourself, to think, to breathe, to reconnect with what matters. You return from it clearer, fuller, more yourself. It gives. It doesn't only protect. Fearful withdrawal is when you step back not to restore, but to avoid, to prevent the possibility of being hurt, misunderstood, or ask for more than you want to give. You emerge from it not clearer, but smaller, more defended, more alone in a way that doesn't feel chosen. There is a difference between healthy boundaries and invisible walls. Healthy boundaries say, I know what I can give, and I know what I need. Here is where I end and you begin. This is how I can be close to you without losing myself. Invisible walls say, no one gets in. Not really, not all the way. Because all the way is where the danger lives. Healthy boundaries allow intimacy. Invisible walls prevent it, even from the people you actually want near. And there is a difference between being selective and being unavailable. Being selective means you don't give your energy to everyone. You choose carefully. You wait for depth. You don't perform connection you don't feel. And being unavailable means that even when the right person arrives, the one with patience, with depth, with the capacity to meet you where you are, you find a reason, a reservation, a protective exit. The uncomfortable truth is that these two things can look identical from the outside, and they can feel identical from the inside. which is exactly why the question matters so much. You have to ask yourself, honestly and gently, which one am I doing right now? Not because the answer is simple, but because the question is necessary. Anna tried to let someone in. She really did. He was patient. He didn't ask her to be different. He seemed to understand, without her explaining, that she needed slow conversation and long silences and plans that didn't feel like performances. And for a while, she let herself believe it could work. But then something shifted. Not in him, in her. The closer he got, the more restless she became. She started noticing small things that bothered her, started creating distance she told herself was reasonable, started finding, very efficiently, all the reasons this wouldn't last. She told herself she was being realistic, protecting herself from future pain. She spent months constructing the case for why it was better to end it early than to risk the larger loss later. What she didn't see, not then, was that she was doing what she always did, taking the exit before anyone could take it from her. She wasn't protecting herself from him. She was protecting herself from the version of herself that would have to exist if she let him stay. The version that needed someone. The version that could be left. Well, Matt, this wasn't a flaw in her character. It was the echo of every time she had reached out and found nothing there. It was the scar tissue that forms around old wounds, not to hide them, but to make sure they never open again. The pattern of pushing people away isn't a sign that you don't want love. It's a sign that you've wanted it so much and been disappointed so completely that your whole system reorganized itself around not wanting it too openly, not too visibly, not in ways that could be taken from you. And here is the frase di virata, the sentence that changes everything. You're not afraid of being alone. You're afraid of what happens when someone gets close enough to stay. That's the real fear. Not solitude. You've made peace with solitude. What frightens you is permanence, presence, the weight of someone who actually stays. And because if they stay, you have to stay too. Fully. Without the exit strategy quietly tucked in your back pocket. And that is a different kind of vulnerability than anything solitude ever asked of you. So what does it actually look like? Gently, without forcing anything. To begin loosening that pattern, it might mean noticing the moment you start to retreat, not to stop yourself immediately, but just to name it. There it is, the cooling, the managed distance. Awareness, even without change, is the beginning of something real. It might mean asking yourself what you're actually afraid of in this specific situation, with this specific person. Not in general, not as a theory, but right now, today. Is this fear old or new? Is it about them or about someone they remind you of? It might mean letting one true thing be seen. Not everything, not an overwhelming disclosure, but one honest moment. One layer of the actual you offered carefully, and then watching what they do with it. Do they handle it gently? Do they ask to understand more? Or do they flinch? It might mean staying a few minutes longer than your instinct tells you to. Not hours, not a commitment, just the small act of not leaving when the first wave of self-protection arrives. Sitting with the discomfort long enough to see if it passes. It might mean grieving the connections you've already let go, not to punish yourself, but to honor what they were. To acknowledge that some of the people you walked away from deserved a door that stayed open longer. That grief, when you let yourself feel it, is information. It tells you what mattered. And it might mean trusting, slowly and carefully, that not everyone who gets close will take something from you. Some people, the rare ones, the patient ones, the ones who speak your language without needing a translation, will bring something instead. You are not broken for running this pattern. You are not unlovable for having built these protections. You are not too damaged, too complicated, too far gone for real connection. You are someone who learned to survive in conditions that required you to be careful. And you were right to be careful. That carefulness kept you whole in seasons when wholeness was not guaranteed. But you don't have to live in that season forever. The person who is drawn to your quietness, who doesn't need you to perform or explain or become easier. That person isn't looking for someone who has dismantled all their walls. They're looking for someone who knows where the door is. You already built the sanctuary. You already know how to protect what matters. What comes next is learning that some people are worth letting past the gate. Not because they've proven they won't hurt you. No one can prove that. But because living as though everyone will has already cost you more than being hurt ever could. Schopenhauer believed that the deepest human pain comes not from suffering itself, but from the will turning against its own nature. When the thing inside you that longs for connection is perpetually overruled by the thing inside you that fears it, that internal war is its own kind of suffering, quiet, invisible, not exhausting. You deserve a ceasefire, not a surrender, not the collapse of every boundary you've ever drawn, just the recognition that the war doesn't have to continue at the same intensity it always has, that some people, not many, but some, are worth the risk of being known by, and that you, exactly as you are, complex, careful, quietly longing, are worth the risk of being loved. Imagine this. You stop leaving before you're left, not because you've stopped being afraid, but because you've decided. The fear doesn't get to make all the decisions anymore. You let one person in, slowly, carefully, at your own pace, not performing openness, actually practicing it, one honest sentence at a time. And you find that being truly known by the right person doesn't diminish your solitude. It doesn't crowd your inner world or disturb the quiet you've worked so hard to build. It completes it. Your need for space doesn't disappear. Your inner world doesn't get invaded. The sanctuary you've built doesn't collapse. It gets witnessed. And that is different from everything you feared. Not an intrusion. Not a demand that you become someone else. Just another person, sitting quietly at the edge of your inner world saying, I see this. I understand. I'm not going anywhere. That's what becomes possible when you stop running from the people you actually want to keep. Not certainty, not the guarantee that it will work out exactly as you hope. Just the chance, just the open door, just the willingness to find out what happens when you stay. And here's the question that comes next, because it will come. I promise. Even when you find that person, even when you let them in, how do you stay close without losing the solitude that keeps you sane? How do you love without disappearing into someone else's world, without sacrificing the quiet that makes you who you are? That's a different kind of navigation entirely, one that unfolds in the next quiet conversation. Alone together, a quiet corner of the internet for people who choose solitude over half-hearted connections.